What's
We're
up?
here.
What's up? Happy Monday, everybody. I'm not in Denver yet. Not leaving till later. So the rest of the week, at least I will be in Denver. Kiara decided she doesn't want to be in the same place. It's kind of like the Heinz.
rough.
The Heinz ketchup recipe. The executives. There's only 4 or 5 people at Heinz that know the actual recipe for ketchup,
That's right.
and they can never travel together ever. They're never in the same place at the same time because they're worried that if the plane goes down or something happens at any one particular location. Anyways, that's why we're not going to Denver at the same time, because
The secret recipe.
Go FUD yourself would then no longer be a thing. So this is risk management on our part. Anyways, all right.
We talk about risk management a lot.
What's that?
We talk about risk management a lot.
That's right. So
Yeah.
I guess that's what we got to keep doing.
We gotta do
Anyways, all right.
So
what do we got on? What do we
I
got
added a new thing at the bottom. So on Mondays, because there's so much news, we can't cover everything. So on Mondays, I have a 1,000 character ticker. That's like all the reasonable news that we're also not covering. So it's not gonna be every day, but on Mondays, you get this extra bonus of news.
A bonus carousel.
News bonus.
News bonus. There we go.
Okay.
But there was
the
a lot
first thing to talk about that people are super funny about is that Coinbase is going to suspend BUSD.
Yeah. I think we can talk most people off the ledge with respect to BUSD. Well,
but I'm panicking. What about my money? Where's my money going to go? What am I doing?
Fuck? So I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, maybe. So the thing with BUSD, essentially what happened is Paxos, which is the regulated issuer, the one that was the middleman, so to speak, where you would escrow your underlying assets and then be able to mint BUSD in exchange for those underlying assets, which has been, I believe, one-to-one collateralized since day one. So there's no under collateralization, there's no treasury management issues, none of that. But the regulators in America more or less said to Paxos, hey, we believe that you're issuing a security the way that they're issuing BUSD. And as a consequence, Paxos said, you know what, this isn't our fight. Our business is much bigger. And this little piece of BUSD is not worth risking the brand reputation and ending up in, forever litigation. As we've seen with Ripple and other entities that have actually pushed back. I mean, Ripple, I can't remember what Brad said last time I talked to him, but I mean, they were in the multiple hundreds of millions in legal fees for him personally. And, something similar for Ripple Labs themselves. So it's insane. That's kind of where this is all coming from. So what Paxos said is that they're going to deprecate issuing new BUSD, but they will still honor, obviously, redemptions, so to speak. So you would come back with your BUSD, you would burn it, and then you would get the underlying asset in exchange. That's a very important piece of this puzzle. So why would Coinbase get rid of it? So the concern is that even though you could always, one BUSD is one USD, right? You could always go back to Paxos, always, if you held BUSD, the theoretical risk of a DPEG is near zero. Problem is, what happens in the market isn't exactly that efficient. So it's possible that with a whole bunch of swapping and a whole bunch of on-chain activities, not going back and redeeming at Paxos one-to-one, there is potential that it could DPEG. And even though I think this is a long tail risk, the chances of this happening in the very short term are pretty low.
Not
financial advice, of course. Thank you. But I think it's quite important from Coinbase perspective. They're a U.S. company. They're U.S. regulated. The U.S. regulators have more or less implied that BUSD is a security. At least their opinion is that it might be a security. And from Coinbase perspective, I mean, you don't want to have your hands dirty with that kind of thing and so much uncertainty. So I don't think it's actually that big of a challenge. honestly, I think it's what is to be expected. If you look at the redemption curve of BUSD, like last week, I think it was 2.5 billion or something like that. And since the beginning of February, I think they've redeemed like close to 10 billion in BUSD back to USD. So, I mean, the system is working how it's supposed to. I think Coinbase is just, what's the point, I suppose, if the asset is being deprecated, what's the point of maintaining it on the platform, especially with some potential regulatory overhang? So yeah,
And
this is
says users can still access their BUSD funds and withdraw them. You just can't sell trade. I think the biggest concern you've already hit on, right, is what if my money depegs? What if I'm holding this here? If they've already addressed that I can pull it out, where does that? I think people are they have fear because of the uncertainty, right? Yeah. I don't know what to do now.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And like, I mean, this is kind of blown up over the weekend, of course. Like people are just kicking and screaming about this. But I mean, like I said, to me, this is just objectively the only path that was going to happen after Paxos said that they were no longer issuing BUSD. Like it only makes sense that slowly most platforms will stop supporting BUSD, in particular on ETH, because BUSD on ETH is the one that's issued directly from Paxos. How BUSD gets to other blockchains has a lot to do with Binance, and I am not in a position to comment on that. But
I was also going to say the fact that Coinbase isn't saying you need to withdraw your funds by such and such time means that they are not just getting rid of the backend support. So they're essentially clicking a button that says, you no longer can trade. We're turning that feature off. But if something changes, surely they'll be able to turn it back on.
Yeah, and I think there's always some concern, especially with the centralized entities subpar performance in 2022 and some of the like weird shit that none of us ever thought was possible happening. Like some of the fraud and just oversight and really terrible risk management practices. Paxos, of course, isn't the same. They're in a different league in terms of what they do and their reputation. But having said that, I mean, the risk of a depeg in theory is pretty low, right? Because in theory, as long as they continue, as long as there's no skeletons in that closet, and they in fact have collateralized it 1-to-1, which there's been tons of audits and a whole bunch of things, so we have no reason to believe otherwise, then there really is no concern. The only concern is that you might not be able to swap it on chain to get 1-to-1, but there is a path for arbitrageurs, so to speak, people that know how to go through that process, that it should keep the depeg managed. It might be, say, a 5% spread. I'm just throwing numbers out there. There might be a 5% discount that you get selling it on chain, but that 5% is enough for an arbitrageur with deep enough pockets. If I had $100 million sitting in stables, I might buy $100 million worth of BUSD at a 5% discount, and in one transaction, effectively go make $5 million profit, 5% on my 100 million. So it is the depeg risk, although it exists, in my opinion, should be arbitraged away as long as there's no Paxos skeletons, which I don't think there is. I mean, I don't know, but I have no reason.
What I've learned in the last few minutes is that we should probably do our blockchain finance mini series on stablecoins.
Yeah,
it seems like there's a lot to unpack with stablecoins.
Yeah, I mean, the BUSD and Circle's USDC, I think, are the closest to, are the easiest to understand. They're 1-to-1 collateralized with US dollars. Pretty straightforward for all intents and purposes. And then you get different models like MakerDAO and DAI, and there's a whole bunch of like Frax. That's an algo under collateralized, algo stable. There's a whole bunch of really interesting designs coming, but I think they're so premature, many of them at the moment, that they're not, meaningfully trusted for large scale use. And so,
what isn't 1-to-1 collateralized?
What?
Meme coins.
Fuck yeah, that was a smooth transition. Meme coins. We did have an episode on meme coins. I think it was like episode 2 or 3 early on.
It was last week. And
Was it last
Maybe
week?
our episode was foreshadowing this headline.
Yeah.
No. So basically, yesterday for North Americans and Monday for most of the rest of the world, a major Shiba wallet moved a bunch of things around, and people are worried about it. They don't know what that means. They don't know what kind of market indicators they're going to be. The short of it is that they moved 182 billion Shiba Inu tokens around, which is they hold about 0.3% of the total supply of Shiba, this particular wallet. They hold more than 3.1 trillion Shiba tokens. So they've only moved 182 billion. That seems very reasonable amidst their 3.1 trillion. But people are worried. What does this mean? How do we read this? Is there going to be a price drop? If I'm holding 100,000 Shiba tokens worth 0.03 cents each, what is that going to mean for my holdings, right?
Yeah, I think this is an on-chain metric. This is an opportunity of blockchain that we don't have in TradFi. Is in TradFi you can't transparently see where and how institutions and larger players are moving their assets, where they're moving them to, and glean some insight from it. So we do have a unique opportunity in blockchain to be able to see some of those things. I think the problem, in my opinion, is that the conclusions that are drawn from those assumptions, people adhere to them a lot stronger than maybe they should. There's still some, guesstimation on how that's happening and so on and so forth. So this is what I think when I see this kind of thing. Okay, 182 billion of these tokens, whatever that is. It's a fraction of a penny. It's probably in the tens of millions of dollars. The trading volume of Shiba per day, I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to find it now, is excessively high. Because Shiba is tradable on every major exchange, and there's a lot of perps and futures, and there's just a lot of ways to participate in Shiba. But the daily transaction trading volume is 302 million. So, simply saying, okay, 10 million, if this person wanted to sell $10 million worth of Shiba tokens, they could, of course, they could probably do it in one limit order that would create a massive sell wall, etc. They could market sell it, which would be ridiculous because they would run all the way down the order book and lose a lot of assets or a lot of value. Most likely, what's happening is, it's just someone that's planning to have a sell strategy that probably happens slowly over time amidst certain, price points or certain news events or different things that are coming up. I mean, the fact that these people have 3 trillion tokens and haven't sold them when Shiba was worth a hell of a lot more in the last bull means a couple of things. For whatever reason, they believe probably in some version of the long term of this protocol. Okay, so that's valued at 40 million. So yeah, the 180 billion is like a drop in the bucket relative to even daily trading volume, which is, as long as the person is sophisticated, which they likely are, to still have 3.1 trillion Shiba tokens at this point. Having a lot of Shiba tokens doesn't necessarily make you sophisticated, but the point is they've got a pretty good amount of assets there, and I would suspect they're probably going to be somewhat strategic in how they do things. I bet if you went back far enough, you could probably see that wallet 6 months or a year ago moving a similar amount, and they probably did the same thing over the last year. They moved the amount, slowly sold them. No one ever thought anything of it again.
You know what? Let's pop on Etherscan today and validate that. We'll throw it in the thread.
Okay, done. We'll figure it out. We'll go see what this wallet has done previously,
and see if it deserves the FUD or not.
But this is a real thing, though, right? Like, there's a lot of people that follow very closely inflows and outflows from centralized exchanges of your core blue chip assets, your ETH, BTC, AVAX, Solana, Polkadot, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there is a reason why generally you want to follow those trends. Now, what I would be more concerned about is if I saw many wallets of similar size starting to do the same thing at the same time. right? Because then you're thinking, okay, either these guys are insiders, which they probably are, and they know something we don't, or the collective belief is that maybe it's peaked, or some, that now is a good time to start thinking about it, and so that's kind of where I would be looking, right? Like one whale wallet moving some assets, okay. If now next week they move some more assets, and next week some more assets, I wouldn't be worried so much about price impact. I'd be more worried about what does that actually mean? Like, why are they offloading when technically the token is down 50% year over year? And if you go back a little further than a year, it's down a hell of a lot. These stupid little numbers are hard to do the math, but anyways, it's down a significant percent, 70-80% from its peak in the recent bull. So, I mean, if somebody's offloading now quickly, I would start to think a little bit more about it. There's always a possibility that this person also just needs liquidity. And that's a real thing too. We all have assets tied up throughout DeFi in different places, and sometimes you need to cover positions or whatever. And so there's always that possibility too. I think just taking this all with a grain of salt is generally the best approach. That's what we're trying to do with Go FUD Yourself, is talk about some of this shit, maybe bring it down a little bit from the like pure FUD, perspective, and say, okay, this is something worth looking at.
So who's less of a sophisticated trader than this Shiba person?
Who's that? Me?
The American government. My segues are fire today.
Yeah, they're fucking
awesome. So big on regulation. We love talking about regulation because it's hot and because it's so funny. Basically, the EU has said, let's fucking go on crypto. So Germany, conservative Germany, has said we will have the best framework in the world in which companies can develop. We'll have everything you need for a workable market. And our senator of Wyoming said the European Union's ahead of us, Switzerland's ahead of us, Australia's ahead of us, England's ahead of us, not just second and third world countries, which, first of all, super not PC to say, but additionally, not entirely wrong.
Yeah, I think we talk about this a lot, obviously. Regulation is something that I think all of us are paying attention to, whether you're a builder or a participant or, waiting for some regulatory structure to be in place before you become a builder or a participant. It's pretty front and center for most people in the space. If you're not thinking about regulation and what it might mean, I would be more concerned. Having said that, the US is at a very, very, very important inflection point, in my opinion, and in many ways. And so this could probably spark a much longer conversation. But I think the US is at an interesting spot with respect to global fiat dominance of the US dollar as the global currency for exchange and contracts. The war in Russia, obviously, we've seen the vast majority of trade in those areas of the world now, including those countries with the Middle East, is happening with the yuan as the asset that is the contract asset, not the US dollar. And so that's interesting and that's concerning from an economic powerhouse perspective. If you couple that uncertainty with some of the regulatory challenges we've had from an energy perspective, from a finance perspective, et cetera, I think the US is potentially at a weird precipice where if we continue to go down the path we're going down, we will absolutely fall off as a leader on the world stage from an economic perspective. Maybe not in GDP, but in economic leverage. And I mean, we can talk about all the things that have contributed to this, doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, the future of finance in many ways and the future of global commerce in many ways will depend on blockchain technology, whether we like it or not, whether anybody, whether you want to subscribe to a vision of the future where crypto exists or not, doesn't matter, because blockchain is here to stay. And anybody that pays attention to the space can see that, because you can see there's incredibly sophisticated technology that is making people's lives much better.
I also find we've talked about critical thinking a lot. It's our favorite topic on Go Fudge Yourself, because that's the point. And we've talked about regulation quite a bit. People are fuddy about regulation in the States. People have very different outlooks as to what Hong Kong is doing versus what the USA is doing, and they should regulate, we shouldn't regulate, so on and so forth. This news title kind of brought me back to that, because the title is "Crypto Firms Brace for Carpet Bombing Moment in US as Europe Beckons." And you could rework that title to be any other fear-mongering thing in the world right now. It doesn't have to be crypto, right? It could be energy, it could be food shortage, it could be the war between Russia and Ukraine, it could be all sorts of things. And it's just this like super funny headline that isn't actually going to change what regulation is doing in the States. And it isn't actually going to change what regulation is doing in the EU, but it might make you angrier about it.
Well, it fear sells. We talk about this almost every episode.
No, but it's just wild.
It's what perpetuates the problems. It's what perpetuates the uncertainty, really, in many ways. Is now you have all of these people that are reading this significantly hyperbolic title, generally speaking, like carpet bombing.
What does that even? There's nothing in it about.
we have many U.S. entities that I'm not concerned about them being carpet bombed. Having said that, you brought up an interesting point. We all love the thought of what regulation might bring in terms of like just cutting the shit and not having this loom over us all the time, in terms of like maybe something's going to be legal or illegal in the future and we don't really know. I think everybody can kind of get on board with the transparency and like what that should mean. But there's just some things that you're going to have to give up. And in the meantime, even though arguments can be made, and I say this all the time, that it's not as transparent in private, or as anonymous in private or pseudo-anonymous in private as anybody thinks. Like to remain completely anonymous and untraceable in crypto and be able to use the assets for anything other than, pre-bought gift cards and all this other nonsense. Well, you can't. There's pretty much no way with any size to be able to do that anonymously. So, it's something that we feel like we're holding on to as a community, that, this is why crypto started and blah, blah, blah. But it already doesn't exist. Regulation isn't going to change that. Regulation is just going to make the rules of the game clearer, and in my opinion. So anyways.
That was funny, JD.
It was funny.
Monday morning fun. Let's end on a hilarious note. Well, hilarious to me, probably not that funny to the guy involved. Some guy. This was covered, for the record, this was covered by the Boston Globe, the BBC. This is a real news article. I just picked Kotaku because if you want to look it up, they kind of consolidated all the articles together. But essentially, someone was working at a high school as their operations facilities person, and he put together some Bitcoin mining, and it's been running for they don't know how long. And it charged the school about $17,500 American dollars in electric fees. But I want to know what he made. Nobody's talking about the wallet or how much he actually mined.
Probably not that much.
Well, not if it was recent, right?
Yeah, well, that and electricity is just expensive in the U.S. period.
Yeah, that's true.
But one of the biggest challenges for proof of work mining is the cost of electricity. That's like the number one. Hardware but electricity is
for sure.
Month over month, year over year, and
which it was pointed out to me by one of our peers today at RBL that will be the same for AI, right? That these new technologies are always going to be very electric heavy up front.
Absolutely. Well, they're compute heavy, right? It takes a lot of computing power, AI in particular. Yeah, if you're in the space, it makes sense, right? Like we're doing some work with AI now on a few different fronts, and it's amazing how much of a difference professional grade equipment makes in rendering, in getting results that you want and producing, things that scale via AI. And so, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The compute cost, whether you use cloud or hardware for AI, is going to be a real thing. And there's going to be some interesting businesses, I think, that evolve around opening that up to the average person, similar to what kind of cloud has done for storage currently, right?
Which might be needed. This guy built it in the basement of a school. He got all the electric and ducting rerouted to there so that it would work. I don't know how long it was there for. Nobody knows yet. They're completing an investigation. The thing that really kills me about this article is that he has been ordered to stay away from all public buildings in the township where it happened. And that's hilarious to me because, like, one, don't do that. Follow him around and see where else he might have a bunch of Bitcoin mines.
Yeah.
But two, like, where are you worried about him putting this up?
Right? Like, where else does he have unfettered access? Like, it's kind of
right. But also, like, are they now checking the basement of City Hall and all the public libraries? Being like, oh no, what if we're mining Bitcoin and we didn't realize? But I think this is interesting because yes, it sucks for him. It's hilarious to me, just as like kind of an off-the-cuff news story. But JD, you make a good point, which is it's not accessible to the average person. Right? This person wasn't able to build this in his home because the cost was too outlandish for him. So what kind of solutions are we going to see to make this a retail solution in the future?
Well, Bitcoin mining is incredibly loud. Like the mining rigs are very loud. They put off a ton of heat. Mm-hmm. If you have one of them in your house, like you have to have your air conditioning running at the same time, like effectively. And they're so loud that like you can't function or sleep or anything anywhere near it. So you have to have like, noise dampening and all this other nonsense. So building it in the school base, I bet you there's a lot more of this shit than you think. There's probably a lot of these businesses that have like little warehouses out in the back that the owners never go to. And there's probably some nonsense operating there. I just think it's interesting how the pendulum swings too, right? So they're like, oh, this guy had all this shit in this place where he works in the school basement, and he had all this access and so on, and it makes sense. Let's not allow him in any public building. Like, really? Like, what the fuck is that going to do? Nothing.
What's he going to do? I don't know. It's funny what you say about Bitcoin miners being so loud and heat sensitive, right? Yeah. I know someone who lives in Calgary who is a landlord. They have several different properties. And whenever a property was too cold, he would actually install a Bitcoin miner in the basement of that property to help with the heating of the basement, because he figured that in a cost analysis, he may as well be making money if he's spending the money on electric anyway. I'm not saying it was effective, but I thought it was a fun, creative solution.
So Canada is actually one of the few places globally that, maybe not so much in the last couple of years, but prior to 2020, Canada was actually one of the most attractive venues for proof of work mining. With some obvious exceptions, China, et cetera, until they banned it all. But one of the reasons that Canada was so attractive was the cost of energy was pretty low. It's not quite the case now in Canada. We don't need to get into that. But we'll have to see how this comes out. But I bet you there's a lot more of this happening than you think. You hear these like little anecdotal stories about in older neighborhoods where the power lines aren't underground, where they all go like in the back alleys and stuff, backyard. And then you can see like people, tapped into other people's electricity and so on. And it's just kind of incredible. Actually, we had a long time ago, I had a friend that worked in an office in Calgary when I lived in Canada. And they ran the office in Calgary, but it was a company out of Ontario. The head office was in Ontario, and their electricity bills went up so drastically over the course of a few months that their owners felt that they must be operating Bitcoin miners in the business. Now, it turns out they weren't, and there's other explanations for it. But I mean, it's a real thing. Businesses and individuals are really thinking about this, right?
Even though we're near the end of Bitcoin mining, so they say.
Well, Bitcoin mining will continue. We're near the end of proof of work in many ways.
Yes.
Nonetheless,
that is Monday. Right. That's the weekend and Monday.
The weekend and the Monday. We will see you tomorrow, 12:30 Eastern from Denver.